An incredibly gorgeous alpha arrived in our village, and the village chief arranged for him to stay at my place. I worked from dawn to dusk, catering to his every need, but he looked down on me for being a beta and for being a country boy. The day he left, I chased after his sedan and tripped in a dirt rut. He didn't even look back. My heart died that day, and I got engaged to a sickly beta in the village. On the day of my wedding, the front door was kicked open. That gorgeous alpha stood in the doorway, his face dark enough to drip water. Main text. Karis' knuckles went white as he gripped the peeling wooden doorframe. Through the narrow crack, a warm incandescent light sliced across his face like a blade, illuminating his rapidly trembling eyelashes. Just beyond the door, Dick, an alpha with an overwhelmingly inescapable magnetism, was speaking in low tones with a burly bodyguard about his departure itinerary. Carrie compelled himself to uncurl his fingers, his palms already slick with cold sweat. He slipped silently back into the shadows of the hallway, the old wooden floorboards groaning faintly beneath him. He needed to turn on the water heater. If there was no hot water for his shower later, Dick's perfectly sculpted brows would knit together in impatience. He padded softly downstairs. At the landing, the warm, cozy glow of the wall lamp fell right on his mother Fanny's graying temples. The older beta woman, her face etched with the wrinkles of time, looked up, her eyes brimming with gentle concern. "Carrie, is Dick asleep?" Carrie shook his head, his gaze dropping to the worn toes of his slippers. "Mom, would you be willing to move to the city?" The air fell into a brief silence. Dick was leaving. Since they were a couple, it was only natural that Carrie would go with him. Fanny didn't pry into the complicated details. She simply reached out with her rough, weathered hand and firmly ruffled Carrie's hair. "Mom will go wherever, as long as you're doing well. Just don't let yourself get mistreated, Carrie." Carrie sniffled, a soft flush of red touching the corners of his eyes. He forced a bright, glowing smile. "Don't worry, Mom. Soon enough, we'll have a third person at our dinner table." Fanny's door clicked shut, and the heavy thud of leather shoes echoed in the stairwell. Dick walked slowly down the steps. The immense domination radiating from the high-tier alpha instantly warped the normally warm, soft air of the little country house. Stopping just 2 steps away, Dick ignored the bodyguard behind him and breached Carrie's personal space. He seized Carrie's hand, his fingertips rubbing across the back of Carrie's hand with a commanding heat. "What are you thinking about, smiling so happily?" Dick's voice was a low rumble. Carrie squeezed that well-defined hand back, his fingertips curling inward. "Thinking about our wedding." The curve of Dick's lips froze. The superficial layer of amusement in his eyes snapped shut, like blinds being pulled down. Why think that far ahead? A wave of bitterness, like biting into an unripe, tart wild berry, seized Carrie's throat. His Adam's apple bobbed sharply. He stared fixedly at Dick's flawlessly sculpted face, desperately trying to find a single crack in the disguise hidden within those bottomless pupils. Sensing Carrie's suddenly rigid spine, Dick's arms smoothly wrapped around the back of his neck. "Didn't you say you were going to show me your secret base? Shall we go now?" Dick lowered his head, his scorching breath fanning directly over the shell of Carrie's ear, making that small patch of skin instantly flush a furious red. Karis' fingers curled at the seams of his pants. The secret base was supposed to be reserved only for a future mate, but feeling that immensely controlling hand on the nape of his neck, he ultimately couldn't resist the alpha's gravitational pull. The early summer night breeze swirled a gentle warmth across the flat concrete roof. Carrie sat on the ground cross-legged, tilting his head up to smile at Dick, a brilliant galaxy of stars reflecting in his eyes. He patted the empty space beside him. "Sit. I cleaned it up just for this." Dick stood rigidly in place. The bleak moonlight traced the sharp bridge of his nose and his severe jawline like a scalpel, his custom-tailored shirt giving off an expensive, icy sheen in the dark. "No, it's filthy." Karis' outstretched hand halted in midair, his 5 fingers stiffly curling into his palm one by one. Not only did Dick refuse to sit, but with an unquestionable grip, he pulled Carrie up from the ground. "I'm done looking. Okay, we can watch standing up." Carrie compromised, his voice so low it was almost carried away by the wind. He raised a trembling fingertip, pointing to the brightest star in the night sky. "Do you see that star?" "I actually gave it a name." Dick's arm wrapped perfunctorily around Carrie's waist. "Yeah, got it. Let's go down." "It's hot, There are mosquitoes, and I need a shower. Feeling the utterly cold yet aggressively inescapable hands on his waist, Carrie slowly lowered his eyelashes, casting heavy shadows over his eye sockets. Okay. They walked single file down the steep staircase. Dick's broad back completely blocked the light from ahead, his impatient mutters echoing in the narrow stairwell. Don't come up here next time. The stairs are too steep. What's so great about the stars anyway? A sudden draft swept through the corridor, plastering Carrie's thin cotton t-shirt against his skin. He bit down hard on his lower lip, his chest heaving sharply, his knuckles turning white as he tightly gripped the fabric over his heart. He turned his head and took one last look at the sky through the narrow roof door. That once dazzling star had somehow been entirely swallowed by a rolling, ink-black cloud of gloom. Steamy, warm yellow vapor fractured the cramped bathroom into a hazy, dreamlike blur. Water droplets meandered down the sharply defined lines of Dick's lean abs. Carrie lowered his eyelashes, his gaze sweeping over his own flat, soft stomach, his thumb awkwardly rubbing against the rough calluses on his palm. "Your abs look amazing," he murmured softly. Through the mist, Dick's eyes darkened abruptly. He grabbed Carrie's wrist with an undeniable magnetism, pressing that slightly calloused hand flat against his tight, burning muscles. "Help me." Along with that low, husky command, a highly intense, humid breath instantly drained the last ounce of oxygen from the bathroom, twisting into an invisible, heavy vine that wrapped tightly around Carrie's neck. Carrie yanked his hand back, his chest rising and falling violently, the hot steam bringing a flushed red to the corners of his eyes. He took a half step back, his clear pupils filled with stubbornness. "We can only do that kind of thing after we get married." Dick stared at the unshakable resolve on his face, his lips pulling into a mocking sneer. The swirling, humid heat around them instantly shattered, turning into a biting, sharp layer of frost. "Get out." That night, Carrie lay on the sticky bamboo mat, facing the slowly oscillating fan, and didn't fall asleep until the early hours of the morning. The harsh light of dawn stung Carrie's eyes. He pushed open the half-closed wooden door to find the room empty, leaving only a neat, cold bed. Outside the courtyard gate, the village chief's lips were moving in the blinding sunlight, but all Carrie could hear was a piercing mechanical ringing in his eardrums. He spun around frantically and plunged into the thorny path up the back mountain. Rough branches mercilessly slashed his cheeks and arms, leaving glaring, crimson scratches. The morning wind in the valley tore at his hoarse throat. Dick. On the winding mountain road ahead, a black sedan kicked up a heartless cloud of dust. Carrie's knees gave out, and he crashed heavily into a muddy dirt mound, grazing his palm into a raw, crimson scrape. Just then, the car's taillights flashed at the edge of his vision and stopped. The old, cracked phone in his pocket began to buzz. With trembling fingertips, Carrie swiped the screen, the cold white light illuminating his paper-pale face. There was only a single brief line on the screen. "Carrie, we're over." Crystal clear tears smashed onto the screen, blurring those ruthless characters. Dick wasn't from Carrie's village. He was from the big city, taking refuge in the countryside due to family issues. The two-story house Carrie lived in was newly built using money from years of selling watermelon. It was the most lavish house in the whole village. Originally, it was built to marry a wife and give Fanny peace of mind. After the house was finished, many neighbors tried to set Carrie up on dates, but he always felt something was missing. Later, the village chief brought Dick to Carrie's home. Carrie was stunned the first time he saw Dick, such a beautiful alpha. Like an angel. It was the first time Carrie had seen someone that good-looking outside of a TV screen. Carrie took meticulous care of Dick, not for any hidden agenda, but simply because such a beautiful alpha shouldn't have to suffer. On a quiet afternoon, Dick pulled Carrie aside and asked if he wanted to date him. Looking at that face, Carrie found it utterly impossible to shake his head. And just like that, they dated in secret for nearly 2 months. When he found out Dick was returning home, Carrie started calculating his savings, planning to buy a house in Dick's city. But he never expected Dick to just abandon him like this. On the walk back home, Carrie was totally silent. With every beat of his heart, his chest ached, a dense, suffocating pain. The moment the village chief saw Carrie, he hurried over. "Carrie, you're gonna be rich." Carrie froze. "Huh?" The chief patted Carrie's shoulder. "Someone just called me, said they want to contract all the watermelons on your farm." Carrie had planted 10 acres of watermelons. At 3,000 kilos an acre, Minus the cost of seedlings and fertilizer, head make at least $20,000. 20,000. Karis' eyes lit up. Seriously? Uncle, you're not messing with me, right? They want it all? The chief nodded. Yeah, it's not a scam. The deposit is already transferred. I'll send it to you. Hurry up and go pick them. They're coming to the village tomorrow to pick them up. Carrie immediately suppressed his heartbreak, grabbed his straw hat, and headed to the fields. Wearing his battered straw hat, he worked like a tireless machine, frantically harvesting under the blinding, harsh sunlight. Sweat rolled down his lean jawline, dripping into the scorching earth and evaporating instantly. As long as he didn't stop, he wouldn't think about that icy text message. He wouldn't think about the bride price he had prepared like a total joke. Carrie hoisted up another heavy watermelon, when suddenly, massive dark spots swarmed his vision. The world spun violently, and a weightless sensation of falling slammed into him. In the very last second before completely losing consciousness, a towering figure, radiating an incredibly gentle, cool-toned luminescence, blocked out the glaring sun and slowly approached him. When he opened his eyes again, the sweltering heat that had been burning his insides was entirely dispelled by a strange, refreshing coolness. In the air around him, specks of frost shimmering with a gentle blue light drifted down visibly. As those motes of light landed on Carrie's red, swollen scratches, they instantly melted into a soothing breeze, smoothing away all the agitation and stinging pain. A long, elegant hand, pale as cold jade, gently brushed aside the sweat-soaked bangs on his forehead. Carrie lifted his heavy eyelids, his pupils dilating instantly. What entered his vision was a face of flawless, almost divine perfection. A pool of tender spring water flowed in his deep eyes, refracting a breathtakingly soft halo beneath the dappled shadows of the trees. So beautiful. Karis' cracked lips parted, murmuring unguardedly. Even more beautiful than Dick. The strange man's lips curved into a stunning smile, his fingertips gently wiping away a tear that slipped from the corner of Carrie's eye. The tear on his fingertip, upon touching that snow-white glow, crystallized into a dazzling ice shard. You're very sad. The man's deep voice resonated with an ancient, grounding, and healing magic. Tell me why, won't you? Wrapped in that gentle, translucent scent of frost and snow, Carrie dropped all his defenses. With red-rimmed eyes, his voice broke into a fractured sob. He went back to the city. He said, "We're over." But I even had the bride price ready to marry him. With trembling hands, he fished a rough ring out of his pocket, carefully wrapped in red cloth and woven from emerald green wild grass. This is love grass from the highest mountain. I was going to marry him. The man gazed at the humble woven grass ring, the frosty halo around him softening even more. He leaned in slightly, the cool, pure frost wrapping flawlessly around Carrie like the softest veil. Then, how about considering someone else? The man asked, staring into Carrie's unfocused eyes, his voice as soft as a whisper in a dream. What do you think of me? Carrie stared blankly at the flawlessly perfect face before him. In his extreme exhaustion, surrounded by this ultimate tender healing presence, he nodded dazedly. Okay. The man proactively offered his left hand, gorgeous as a piece of art. Holding his breath, Carrie carefully slid the grass ring, representing a lifetime commitment, onto the man's ring finger. The emerald wild grass and the snow-pale skin complemented each other, strikingly jarring yet perfectly harmonious. Uncontrollably, Carrie bowed his head and devoutly pressed his pale, cracked lips against the grass ring and the man's knuckles. Mine now. Carrie pulled a goofy, completely unreserved smile. The next second, bathed in that warm, healing, frosty glow, he closed his eyes in perfect peace. When he opened his eyes again, the dancing morning light was climbing up the edge of the bed from the mottled windowsill. Karis' vision slowly pulled into focus. He stared blankly at the face keeping watch by his bed, his fingertips reaching out on their own, hovering in midair. Am I dreaming again? A well-defined, cool palm firmly engulfed Carrie's rough fingertips. With a soft chuckle, the man leaned down on his own accord, pressing that divinely sculpted face against Carrie's palm. Is there warmth? The real, delicate touch of skin shot from his palm straight through his entire body. Carrie's heart pounded wildly against his ribs. His pupils constricted stiffly, and he nodded in a daze. Yes. Then there you go. The man straightened up, his tall, broad frame instantly blocking most of the morning light, casting a deeply dominating shadow over Carrie. Yet, a gentle, entirely harmless smile played on his lips. "My name is Arthur. Imma Beta." Carrie subconsciously held his breath. He swallowed hard, quietly echoing the man's words. "My name is Carrie, and Imma Beta too." Arthur lowered his gaze, his eyes so deep they seemed to absorb all light, staring straight into Carrie. The tips of Carrie's ears flushed crimson at an undeniable speed. He tried to shift his gaze to the peeling paint on the wall, but he was pinned in place by those eyes. "Are you feeling better?" Arthur leaned down, instantly eliminating the safe distance between them. Their cool breaths intertwined, sending a shiver down the side of Carrie's neck. "Yesterday. Do you remember it?" Carrie's ears were red enough to drip. His long lashes fluttered frantically. "I remember." Arthur slowly raised his hand, his long fingertips sweeping lightly across Carrie's trembling eyelashes like fluttering butterfly wings. "So, does it still count?" Carrie was left speechless, his throat feeling as if it were stuffed with wet cotton. Having just suffered a devastating, crushing abandonment, could this bruised and battered shell of a body really catch the almost surreal, perfect person standing before him? Just as Carrie's eyes began to dart away, Arthur slightly turned his wrist, the rough green lovegrass ring glaringly conspicuous in the morning light. He lowered his long eyelashes, his towering frame deliberately arching slightly, allowing his flawless features to project an undeniable vulnerability. "My parents passed away not long ago. Their dying wish was for me to find someone of the same gender to spend my life with." Arthur's voice dropped low, like a broken leaf drifting in the wind. "I was so devastated that my health deteriorated, which is why I came here to recover. Seeing you made me remember their wish. If you don't want yesterday to count, then forget it." The disappointment in his tone was like tangible silk threads, instantly tightening around Carrie's heart. Carrie's fingers curled sharply into the edge of the blanket, his knuckles turning stark white. Seeing Arthur turn his back, about to walk away, he didn't even have time to think. His calloused hand shot out, desperately gripping that cold wrist wearing the woven grass ring. It counts." Carrie's chest heaved violently, the corners of his eyes flushed. "As long as you don't look down on me." Under the warm, incandescent light, Fanny's amazed yet wary gaze quickly dissolved against Arthur's flawlessly gentle smile. That tragic backstory about his parents passing away and coming to the west side of the village to rest completely transformed into reasons for Fanny's heartache the moment Arthur expertly rolled up his sleeves and served 6 piping hot, exquisite dishes. Overjoyed, Fanny dragged Arthur by the hand to the village chief's house to consult the almanac for a wedding date. Carrie swung his hoe under the scorching sun, uprooting weeds with renewed vigor. Invitations quickly spread through the village. A thick stack of watermelon money was solemnly pressed into Arthur's pale palm by Carrie, earning a ripple of spring water warmth in the man's eyes. The day before the wedding, dust danced chaotically in the courtyard beneath the unforgiving afternoon sun. Carrie gripped the broom handle tight, sweeping a flat patch of concrete over and over again, his rough soles scraping against the ground with an anxious rhythm. "Carrie, come take a break." Arthur sat in the shade of the eaves, his gaze sticking to Carrie's spine with tangible weight. "Yeah." Carrie awkwardly shuffled over to the shade. The moment he took the tea, Arthur's warm fingertips naturally brushed across the back of his hand. Arthur pulled him down to sit beside him. His large, elegant hands took a cool, damp cloth and meticulously wiped the beads of sweat from Carrie's forehead. Carrie's spine snapped rigidly straight, his legs stiffly pressed together. As Arthur drew closer, the sweltering, oppressive air in the courtyard seemed to hit an invisible absolute zero. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams spontaneously formed a microscopic layer of ice crystals, shimmering with a cold, ghostly blue light. An incredibly soothing, cool, icy presence instantly banished the heat from Carrie's skin. The cool cloth slid over Carrie's prominent Adam's apple. He swallowed hard, staring hazily at Arthur's collarbone just inches away. "The air around you is really cool, like snow." Arthur's wrist paused slightly, a deep, rich chuckle bursting against Carrie's eardrum. A highly magnetic, dominating dark gleam flashed rapidly in his eyes, instantly concealed beneath a gentle facade. "Is it? Must be my body wash. Does it smell good?" Carrie stared at that flawless face, his ears completely flushed. "Yeah, it smells good." Arthur unhurriedly tossed the cloth into the water basin, his deep pupils locking dead onto Carrie's eyes. Want to get closer and take a better sniff? Before Carrie's brain could process the line, an overpowering force gripped his lower back, pressing his entire body against a broad, hard chest. A fierce, frost-like current of air instantly flooded Carrie's senses. With his cheek pressed against the rock-hard pecs, feeling the vigorous heartbeat, Carrie carefully raised his arms and hugged the man back. Lost in that dizzying, cold fragrance, he absent-mindedly wondered, is Arthur really a beta? This broad, thick-set chest, this overwhelmingly dominating height, no matter how you looked at him, he was a full size larger than Carrie. But his health is poor. So after we're married, I guess I'll still have to play the wife and do the heavy lifting. By the time they got their marriage certificate, night had fallen. After dinner, Carrie tugged at Arthur's shirt hem, leading him all the way up the steep stairs to the rooftop. The early summer breeze lifted the stray hairs on Arthur's forehead. He casually tucked a strand of Carrie's wind-blown hair behind his ear, his fingertips lingering fondly on Carrie's burning earlobe. Why come up here? Carrie squeezed the thick calluses on his palms. He wanted to lie down, but Dick's words, "It's filthy," flashed violently in his mind, and his bent knees stiffened again. He took Arthur's hand and pointed to the lone star in the night sky, tiny but twinkling desperately. "There is a star there. I gave it a name. Do you want to know what it is?" Arthur didn't look at the stars. In the darkness, his gaze wrapped around Carrie flawlessly, like a fine meshed net. "Are you willing to tell me?" Carrie sniffled, the rims of his eyes turning slightly red. "The day my dad passed away, I watched this star all night. I thought to myself back then, when I get married, I have to bring the person I love to see it. It was his way of showing his father the person he'd spent his life with, while also silently praying for his father's blessing." Arthur keenly caught Carrie's quickening breath. He took a step forward, using his massive frame to shield Carrie from the night wind, pulling him securely into his embrace. What is this star's name?" Carrie suddenly bit his lower lip and stubbornly refused to make a sound. "What is it?" Arthur's deep voice rumbled in his chest. "I just made it up on the spot. It sounds silly." Don't laugh. Carrie lifted his flushed face, his voice as quiet as a mosquito. "It's called Watermelon Patch." The air stalled for a second. Panicking, Carrie tried to pull his hand back. "I don't know romance. If you don't like it, I can No, I love it." Arthur cut him off instantly. Those normally gentle eyes were now churning with a bottomless fervor. "I really love that name. It feels like destiny." Carrie let out a sigh of relief. "As long as you like it. Let's go down. There are lots of bugs here. It's so cool up here. Let's look a little longer." Arthur's large hand tightened abruptly, his knuckles clamping down like iron around Carrie's hand. Noticing Carrie's downcast mood, gently guided by Arthur's deep, soft voice, Carrie ended up sprawling out flat on the rough concrete, spilling the entire story about Dick. Without a moment's hesitation, Arthur's towering frame, clad in his expensive shirt, lay down right next to Carrie on the dusty floor. The night wind carried a chill. Staring at the starry sky, Carrie's chest sank heavily as he let out a long sigh. "I just don't understand why we broke up." Before he even finished speaking, Arthur's hand traced Carrie's jawline. Propping himself up on one arm, Arthur's massive, broad frame loomed like a fierce beast finally baring its fangs, entirely blotting out the starry sky from Carrie's vision. He stared down at Carrie's bewildered, shrinking pupils, planting a helpless yet restrained kiss on his forehead. Then, he buried his face against the pulsing carotid artery on Carrie's neck, his canines lightly grinding against the thin skin. "I get jealous too. From now on, don't think about anyone else. Only think about me, okay?" Feeling the deeply dangerous touch against his neck, Carrie's chest burned instantly. He raised his arms, wrapping them tightly around the heavy, scorching body on top of him. Turning his head, his lips brushed past Arthur's ear. "Yeah, no one else. Just you now." Arthur's eyes went pitch black in the dark. He raised his head sharply, pinning both of Carrie's wrists to the concrete above his head with one hand, dipping down to kiss those dry lips fiercely. "Be good, open up." This was definitely not the kiss of a weak beta. In a kiss overflowing with absolute control and fierce predation, Arthur tore away all his disguises without reservation. With a suffocating intensity, he drove deep, savagely conquering his territory, squeezing every last drop of oxygen from Carrie's lungs. The starlight twinkled silently overhead, the night wind completely ignited by this overwhelming heat. In this forgotten corner, they lay entwined for the entire night. The early summer sunlight filtered through the grapevines in the courtyard, scattering dappled light across two crisp, custom-tailored suits. Carrie wore a pitch-black suit, the slim cut highlighting the lean waist sculpted by years of farm work. Beside him, Arthur was dressed in pure white, his broad shoulders filling out the fabric in a flawlessly dominating arc. Amidst the simple, enthusiastic cheers of the relatives, two rough, textured woven grass rings were naturally slipped onto their respective ring fingers. Just as Carrie raised his glass to toast the elders, the courtyard door was violently shoved open. Dick's eyes were rimmed with a terrifying red, glaring at Carrie like a wild beast on the verge of losing control. His chest heaved violently. A bouquet of red roses, crushed out of shape in his arms, was shedding battered petals, the dark crimson sap staining his expensive cuffs. "Carrie, you betrayed me?" The entire yard fell dead silent. Kara's fingers holding the wine glass stiffened slightly as he turned to his side. Arthur's warm, broad hand rested firmly on his shoulder, that grounding, snowy luminescence quietly flowing between their touching fingertips. Kara's tense jawline relaxed. He looked straight into Dick's jealousy-twisted face, his voice cold and absolute. "Dick, we're over. Today is my wedding day. If you're here to congratulate us, take a seat. If not, the door is over there. Your happy day?" Dick ruthlessly hurled the mangled roses onto the concrete, the dark red petals instantly shattering into mud. He took a massive step forward, the veins on his forehead throbbing. "I've only been gone a few days. And you dare to have a happy day with someone else?" "I left. I didn't die." He reached out a vein, bulging hand, trying to grab Carrie's wrist. However, an arm as pale as snow but unyielding as steel intercepted him midair. Shielding Carrie flawlessly behind his broad chest, Arthur's normally gentle eyes now froze over with a terrifying frost. "Are you looking for trouble?" Dick's pupils constricted sharply. A fleeting look of shock crossed his eyes, but it was quickly devoured by frantic rage. "I barely step foot out the door, and you steal my man?" "That's low." A highly mocking sneer curled the corners of Arthur's thin lips. "Didn't you break it off yourself?" "What? You only realized you couldn't live without Carrie after you left?" That sentence cleanly pierced Dick's facade, causing the muscles in his face to twitch involuntarily. Carrie stepped half a pace out from behind Arthur, his gaze as still as a stagnant pool. "Dick, you were the one who sent the text to end it. You did me wrong, but I haven't done you wrong in the slightest." Carrie paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of strong village youths standing up all around them, his voice growing even colder. "Are you sure you want to cause a scene here?" Dick laughed out of sheer fury. Gritting his teeth, he kicked over an empty beer bottle at the corner of a table. The sharp shatter of glass echoed through the courtyard, countless jagged shards refracting the blinding sunlight. "Good for you, Carrie." Just as he turned to leave, Carrie called out to stop him. "You broke a bottle of wine." Dick froze in his tracks, a flash of absurd disbelief in his eyes. Carrie locked his fingers tightly with Arthur's. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they looked like an immovable fortress. "As an apology, say it to us. Happy wedding, Carrie and Arthur." Dick's temples pulsed violently, his teeth grinding together. An extremely explosive, searing alpha pheromone erupted like an invisible storm, instantly crushing the surrounding air. The leaves in the courtyard shuddered wildly under the immense domination, and the very air seemed to warp from the heat. However, before that suffocating heat wave could even brush the hem of Carrie's clothes, a massive, incredibly pure blizzard descended silently, yet overwhelmingly, radiating from Arthur as its epicenter. Visibly icy blue frost instantly froze Dick's frantic heat wave, grinding it into lifeless ash on the ground. Forced half a step back by this terrifying pressure, Dick stared dead at Arthur. "You're an alpha?" His manic gaze drifted to their intertwined hands. Suddenly, as if realizing some monumental joke, he burst into hysterical laughter. "Carrie, do you know Hez an alpha?" Kara's heart skipped a beat. He jerked his head up to look at Arthur. Arthur's deep eyes met his gaze, calm and waveless, but the grip of his palm was shockingly tight. Carrie closed his eyes, forcibly suppressing the chaotic energy churning inside him. When he opened them again, his eyes were perfectly clear. "I know. I wouldn't marry someone I didn't know inside and out." Dick's laughter came to a screeching halt. Staring intently at Arthur's unparalleled handsome face, he suddenly slapped his own forehead, his expression twisting into extreme horror. I was wondering why you looked so familiar. You're the heir of the Walton family. Carrie pressed the tip of his tongue hard against the roof of his mouth, lowering his eyelashes to hide his turbulent emotions. Arthur, just how many secrets are you hiding? Carrie, do you even know who he is? Dick roared like a desperate madman. Hez, a ruthless demon who killed his parents and his siblings. A top-tier alpha worth billions, coming to this rural backwater to marry a beta like you. Use your brain and think about it. The yard was dead silent. Fanny called out in worry. Carrie shot his mother a comforting look. Then, he slowly raised his tightly laced hands with Arthur. That rough love grass ring was breathtakingly green in the sunlight. He looked at Dick, a calm smile pulling at the corners of his lips. You don't need to worry about what goes on between us, because I trust my husband. Arthur hadn't said a single word this whole time, but those eyes, shimmering with an icy blue light, stuck to the side of Carrie's face like the most loyal hound, never drifting away for even a second. The farce ended, the guests dispersed, leaving the courtyard empty. In the quiet afternoon, the two worked in silent harmony to clean up the mess. The splashing water hose washed away the oil stains on the ground. Just then, the water spray caught the glaring sunlight, pulling a miniature brilliant rainbow in midair. Arthur tentatively reached out and gave a gentle tug at the hem of Carrie's shirt, his voice very soft and pleading. Look, a rainbow. Carrie kept a cold face, following his gaze for a second. It was beautiful. But he just pressed his lips tightly together, lowered his head again, and stubbornly swept with his broom. I'll explain. A flash of panic crossed Arthur's eyes. Carrie snorted coldly, not listening. Before the words fully dropped, Arthur tossed the water hose aside. The towering white figure closed in instantly, his hands clamping dominantly around Carrie's waist. Let me go, Carrie cried out. The next second, the world flipped upside down. Carrie was hoisted firmly over Arthur's broad shoulder. The chasm-like physical gap between a top-tier alpha and a beta was on full display. No matter how Carrie struggled, those arms, solid as cast steel, didn't budge an inch. Arthur, Carrie shouted, flustered and exasperated, though the tips of his ears were already uncontrollably red. Arthur said nothing. With steady, powerful strides, he carried the man on his shoulder straight into the bridal chamber. With a heavy thud, Carrie was tossed onto the bed. Before he could even roll over and sit up, a massive shadow carrying a cold, snowy scent pressed down. Arthur planted both hands beside his ears, a deeply dangerous yet infinitely tender dark fire igniting in his profound eyes. Husband, time for our wedding night. The low, husky voice carried an electric current, sending a numb tingle from Carrie's eardrums all the way to his lower stomach. Blood rushed straight to Carrie's head, his cheeks flushing so red they could bleed. Arthur chuckled softly, the vibration in his chest transferring over clearly. He took Carrie's calloused hand, slowly pressing it against the collar of his own pristine white shirt. Husband, help me unbutton it. Carrie tried to look away, but that visually explosive, godlike face was right in front of him. The slight redness at the corners of Arthur's eyes, shimmering with moisture, perfectly exploited every single one of Carrie's weaknesses. Guided by Arthur, the pure white suit jacket slipped off, and the shirt buttons came undone one by one. His full, explosive pecs and the deeply sculpted, statue-like 8-pack abs were fully exposed to the air. Carrie's eyes widened sharply. Where was the frail invalid? The primal power contained in this body was 100 times more terrifying than his own, despite him being a beta who worked the fields every single day. Does it feel good? Arthur chuckled low, pressing Carrie's hand to rub against those burning muscles. A rush of heat surged into his nose. Carrie snapped back to reality, raising his leg to press against Arthur's hard stomach, forcing a clear look into his eyes. You still haven't explained. The palm gripping Carrie's ankle paused. His defined fingers lingeringly stroked that patch of skin as he let out a long sigh. Baby, can it wait until we're done? The arrow is already drawn on the bow. No, explain. Carrie didn't give an inch. Arthur leaned down slightly, bringing that god-like face infinitely close to Carrie's, their breaths mingling. I can explain. I'll explain one thing, and you take off one piece of clothing, okay? Carrie's heart beat like a wild drum. Cursing himself for being so weak, he still, as if possessed, nodded his head. Why hide the fact that you're a top-tier alpha? Carrie shrugged off his black suit jacket. Because being a beta swats away a lot of unnecessary flies. A cold gleam flashed in Arthur's eyes. Why come to our village? Carrie kicked off his leather shoes with one hand. To recover. A sickness of the heart. The light in Arthur's eyes dimmed. He enveloped Carrie's hand in his own, his knuckles turning slightly white. Under the dappled shadows of the trees, in an incredibly repressed, heartbreakingly calm tone, Arthur tore open his raw, agonizing scars. A massive family empire, a cruel upbringing that worshipped the law of the jungle. His eldest brother, scheming for shares, ordered an assassination. His father died fighting to protect him. His mother suffered a fatal stroke, and his younger sister accidentally drowned. In just a few days, a family of 5 was reduced to just Arthur and his older brother. In the end, the war for power ended with Arthur's brother falling off a cliff. Arthur inherited the empire, but also a nightmare that clung to him day and night. Carrie. I used to have parents who loved me, an older brother worthy of respect, and a sweet little sister. Arthur's massive frame trembled slightly. The icy blue frost around him entirely dimmed and shattered, turning into a sorrowful winter snow. But now, it's all gone. That suffocating desolation gripped Carrie's heart tight. Without hesitation, he sat up, opened his arms, and fiercely hugged this seemingly invincible, yet thoroughly battered man. You still have me. You have me. Carrie buried his face in the crook of Arthur's thick neck, his voice carrying an unquestionable strength. Arthur jerked his head up, the gloom in his eyes completely torn apart by this pure warmth. He cupped Carrie's face, crashing his burning lips down hard. Carrie, my greatest fortune is meeting you. Hooking his arms around the back of Arthur's neck, blushing deeply, Carrie awkwardly opened himself up to his lover amidst the overwhelming scent of cedar. Come on, let me completely belong to you. Arthur's eyes went totally dark, like an abyss ready to devour everything. His large hands gripped Carrie's long legs, his voice suppressing a frantic restraint. It's going to hurt. Carrie turned his head, burying his burning face into the quilt, his defined fingers gripping the bedsheets tight. I have a strong body. I can take the pain. The instant the words fell, the surrounding air completely ignited. Intertwining cold snow and scorching heat waves wrapped them tight. The swaying ceiling blurred in his vision. Carrie tightened his fingertips sharply, digging into Arthur's solid forearms, completely sinking into the pain and ultimate tenderness. A beam of morning light pierced through the crack in the curtains, striking the floor. Carrie's eyelashes fluttered wildly as he opened his eyes. The moment he tried to roll over, his spine locked straight, and an intense soreness, as if his bones had been pulverized and reassembled, spread wildly from his lower back. The solid wood door was pushed open. Arthur walked in holding a porcelain bowl. The collar of his pristine white shirt was slightly open, and against his cold white neck and broad collarbones were several striking, deeply purple scratch marks. Carrie let that large, elegant hand feed him warm porridge. With every swallow as his Adam's apple bobbed, his clear gaze nailed itself straight to Arthur's face. So, all that tragic backstory you told Fanny was a lie? The fingers gripping the porcelain spoon paused slightly. He didn't answer. Instead, Arthur reached back into his suit pocket and pulled out a plain band. The massive center diamond erupted with incredibly blinding fire in the morning light. He leaned in, trying to force the ring onto Carrie's finger without a word. No, Carrie turned his head, shrinking his hand back in resistance. A parabola traced through the air. With a crisp clink, that priceless diamond ring was thrown expressionlessly by Arthur straight into the metal trash can in the corner. A flash of shock crossed Carrie's pale face. Ignoring the tearing soreness in his lower back, he violently threw off the covers and lunged for the trash can, using a tissue to tightly grasp the cold, glaring ring. Are you crazy? Tossing something this expensive away just like that? Arthur looked down at him from above, his towering frame closing in instantly. Like hoisting up a piece of prey, he scooped Carrie up by the waist and tossed him back onto the bed. If you don't like it, it's worthless. In the depths of those profound eyes, a terrifying, heavy gloom was churning. Carrie slapped the tissue-wrapped ring onto the nightstand, his chest rising and falling sharply. Daunt changed the subject. What else are you hiding from me? Arthur lowered his eyelashes, his rough thumb gently stroking the cheap green woven grass ring on his own ring finger. Do you really have to know? Yes. Kara's fingers slowly tightened over his knees, his knuckles going pale. If you don't make it clear, well, take some time apart right now and cool off. The surrounding air instantly plummeted to freezing. Arthur's broad body slammed down over him. Like a giant beast uncaged, he took a fierce bite of Carrie's lips. Carrie didn't struggle. He just quietly tilted his head back. A moment later, the tyrannical, snowy aura abruptly retracted. Arthur's towering body arched like head lost all support, pressing his burning forehead firmly against Carrie's collarbone. His canines ground heavily against that delicate skin. "What do I do? I always lose when it comes to you." Arthur's voice trembled with huskiness, his searing breath forming an intense contrast with the condensed frost around them. "I was terrified to let you know. I was afraid you wouldn't want me anymore." Kara's suspended fingers curled slightly, eventually landing firmly on Arthur's broad back. He spread his fingers, locking them tight with that cold, large hand, a stubborn resilience shining in his eyes. "Since I chose you, even if you really were a murderer, I'd wait for you outside the prison." Arthur jerked his head up. In those eyes, deep as freezing pools, Carrie's flushed cheeks were reflected perfectly. The rusted iron door let out a screeching grind. The searing afternoon sun beat directly down on the rooftop of the old house on the west side of the village. Carrie, his face pale, instinctively pressed his hand to his aching lower back. Arthur immediately embraced him from behind, pressing his broad, warm palm against the sore spot. Endless streams of gentle blue-tinted cool frost emanated from his palm, instantly soothing the unbearable ache. "What exactly are you trying to show me?" Carrie asked, leaning against that rock-hard chest, panting slightly. Arthur raised his long arm, his elegant index finger pointing toward the lush green fields in the distance. "That patch right there is your watermelon field." Carrie was stunned. He couldn't figure out the connection between this melon field and Arthur's meticulously planned approach. "When I first came to this village, the thing I did most every day was stand on the roof and watch you." Arthur's chin pressed hard into the crook of Carrie's neck. On that flawless face, the gentle disguise was completely ripped away, exposing unmasked obsession and madness. "When I first got here, I was constantly annoyed. I'd sit on the roof and watch you watering the crops under the most venomous midday sun. I thought to myself, how could someone be so stupid? Later, I found out that once the water pump is on, you can't turn it off until you're done watering." Arthur turned his head slightly, his cold lips brushing past Carrie's ear. "Turns out, I was the clueless, illiterate one, the agricultural illiterate." Kara's fingers trembled violently. A cool sensation slipped onto his fingertip. He looked down. A plain band set with a dazzling yellow diamond was now firmly wedged onto his middle finger. Arthur covered it with his own left hand. That green ring woven from cheap weeds overlapped with the top-tier yellow diamond, throwing blinding fire, absurd, yet incredibly harmonious. Arthur continued in a soft murmur. "Later, watching you work in the fields became a habit. When the crops were good, the smile on your face was like a sunny day. When they were bad, you'd stroke the leaves and sigh with your head down. That's when I thought, why couldn't I be God? That way, I could make your crops perfect, so you'd smile every single day. When you didn't come to the fields, I'd think to myself, let it rain, so you'd have to come back and check on things. Seeing you every day became an addiction, and my sickness of the heart slowly shifted from losing my family to only wanting to see you appear. Carrie, I found my cure in this village." These words hit like a sledgehammer, smashing hard against Carrie's chest. His heart began to beat out of control, like vines growing wildly after a heavy rain. "So," Karis Adams' apple bobbed, a shocking red creeping to the corners of his eyes. "You targeted me that early on?" "Yes." Arthur abruptly tightened his arms, gripping so hard he almost crushed Carrie into his own flesh and blood. "So, that day you went to the fields, and I saw you show up covered in hickeys. I almost went insane. I wanted to destroy everything." At this moment, Arthur's face was dark, laced with a paranoid jealousy, and a madness that seemed to want to ruin the whole world. This was a side of Arthur that Carrie had never seen. But Carrie wasn't afraid. He simply let himself lean back into the embrace. Body heat transferred between them through the thin fabric. Arthur was pacified. "I originally thought I'd spend the rest of my life in pain and torment, until I saw you collapse in the field, and I thought, is this a chance from God? If it is, then from now on, I will burn incense and pray every single day to fulfill this vow. A vow. Carrie was his vow. A word far heavier than like or love. Carrie placed a hand over his heart. Your wish came true. Arthur tightened his grip, trying to strangle Carrie into his own body. It came true, but then I started displaying the ugliest trait of humanity, greed. I wanted you to love me, to look at me, to stay by my side forever. So, I lied, but not entirely. Before my mother died, she really did say she wanted me to start a family, and I am indeed an orphan now. Arthur's words carried a hint of cunning, but more importantly, he bit down on Carrie's ear. We are a match made in heaven. Carrie shoved him away hard. Turning to look at that face, the frustration instantly vanished again. You really can't date someone too good-looking. Otherwise, it's too easy to go soft. Carrie stood on his tiptoes, opened his mouth, and mercilessly clamped his teeth over Arthur's lower lip. He just ground his teeth lightly, unable to bear actually hurting him. The moment he let go, the dark fire in Arthur's eyes instantly raged into a wildfire. His massive hand grabbed the back of Carrie's head, pressing him hard against his chest, kissing him back in an incredibly fierce, devouring posture. When the kiss ended, Carrie leaned against Arthur's broad shoulders, panting heavily to catch his breath. He lifted his clear eyes, his gaze sharp as a knife. I'll ask you one last time. Is there anything else you're hiding from me? Arthur's thumb still lingered, stroking the corner of Carrie's swollen lips. He shook his head without hesitation, the snowy aura around him quiet and submissive. Nothing else. Later, I'll have my secretary bring over the asset inventory. I don't want that. Carrie swatted his hand away and stood up straight, his spine rigid as a javelin. He stared directly into Arthur's eyes, enunciating every word. The past is wiped clean, but if I ever find out you're hiding something else from me, it won't just end with a simple conversation. The words dropped. Carrie clearly saw that Arthur's flawlessly perfect, always in control face instantly displayed an incredibly bizarre stiffness. Carrie waited for exactly 5 seconds. Looking at the man's tightly pressed thin lips, the light in Carrie's eyes slowly went cold. Without hesitation, he violently shoved away that broad, solid chest, turned around, and stepped into the dim stairwell without looking back. The very next day, Arthur presented Carrie with a multi-billion-dollar merger and acquisition project. Carrie's fingertips trembled, the expensive fountain pen rolling off the desk. Carrie refused to sign it, and the gentleness on Arthur's face vanished instantly. He said if Carrie didn't sign, he would donate the entire project. Carrie's pupils constricted sharply. He leaned halfway across the desk, desperately grabbing that well-defined wrist. Wait. Wait until our baby is born, and hand it over to them. As soon as the words fell, the aggressive, sharp ice spikes in the air shattered, melting into a shivering pool of gentle spring water in Arthur's eyes. This top-tier alpha was indeed quite sick. When the sickness of the heart flared up, he lay weak in the bed, his cold jade cheeks radiating a fragile pallor. The secretary expertly backed out of the room, shutting the door with a click. Carrie helplessly lifted the blanket, pulling the massive, scorching body into his arms. The frantically churning cold currents instantly tamed, turning into soft, blue-glowing ice crystals that fell obediently on his hair. However, this docility was always short-lived. When the alpha's rut instincts gained the upper hand, a terrifying crimson would be forced into the corners of Arthur's eyes by pure lust. The materialized frost turned into absolutely dominating chains, pinning Carrie ruthlessly to the bed. Over 3 long days of torment, Carrie's pupils were driven to lose focus countless times. In that oxygen-starved trembling, he couldn't possibly answer the manic interrogation about his first love. The sun beat down relentlessly. On the dirt road to the village chief's house, the old phone buzzed wildly in his palm. Dick's name flashed on the screen. Over the phone, that once arrogant voice now carried a pathetic, probing fear. Carrie, don't think Arthur is a good person. He's a total fake, playing gentle and pitiful, bullying you because you don't know anything, playing you for a fool. Carrie frowned. He didn't play me, and he didn't lie to me. Dick, you were the one who played me, abandoned me, and you were the one who ended it. Are you just bitter, or do you really regret it? There was silence on the other end. Carrie continued, It's in the past, Dick. We both need to look forward. Don't contact me again. As Carrie raised his hand to hang up, Dick shouted urgently, Carrie! Do you know who bought your watermelons? It was Arthur. He did it on purpose. He has ulterior motives. You can't outplay him. Expressionless, Carrie watched a busy colony of ants at his feet, not a single ripple crossing his cold white face. Dick, you were the one who ended things. Stop calling. Kara's voice was as cold as a chunk of lifeless iron. Your mayor father probably wouldn't want to see a scandal about his son playing with a beta during a critical time. Without hesitation, he hung up, deleted the contact, and cleared the logs. Kara's fingers flew rapidly, sending a graphic red cleaver emoji to Arthur, who was cooking at home. In the cramped space of the village convenience store, the old TV on the wall flickered with a ghostly blue light. The heir to the Walton family purchased planetary naming rights, dubbing it Watermelon Patch, sparking internet-wide discussions. The news anchor's articulate voice struck like a thunderbolt, and a boiling heat wave instantly burned through Carrie's ears. Stars, Watermelon Patch, Walton. Gripping the piece of paper with the big Watermelon Boss phone number head, just gotten from the village chief, he marched back toward the little house with massive strides. Outside the courtyard gates, Carrie held up his phone and pressed the call button. On the second-floor balcony, a figure with broad shoulders and long legs slowly turned around. Arthur was even wearing that pink floral apron. Holding his violently vibrating phone, his deep gaze crossed the empty space, crashing straight into Carrie's eyes. Are the watermelons good, boss? Carrie tilted his head up, a cold smirk curling the corners of his lips. Very sweet. Plenty of water. Arthur's husky chuckle rode the radio waves, dropping down alongside the summer breeze. To prevent his lover from drowning in the pain of a breakup, he had simply used tens of thousands of pounds of watermelons to consume every drop of Carrie's energy. A numb, aching shiver rippled from the depths of his heart. When Arthur obediently came downstairs and stood in front of him, Carrie gritted his teeth, staring hard into those abyssal eyes. This time, you're really not hiding anything else? Arthur nodded heavily without hesitation, his eyes filled with an undeniably devout sincerity. The rooftop on a summer night, that lone star named Watermelon Patch, shined brilliantly in the Milky Way. Carrie rested his head on Arthur's solid arm. As the night wind brushed by, crystalline, translucent ice flakes glowing with a faint blue luminescence began to drift down quietly. They hovered around the two of them, banishing all the heat. These snowflakes? Carrie reached out a fingertip, lightly tapping a suspended ice crystal. It's my pheromone. Very few people can perceive it. Arthur rolled over, his scorching chest pressing flawlessly against Carrie's back. The frosty glow around them flared brilliantly, sealing them tightly within. Aside from my parents, you are the first. The scattered stars of the universe fell across the tips of their hair. Carrie shrank back into that broad embrace. Let time slow down, he thought. But this peaceful, cozy atmosphere instantly collapsed under the alpha's deep, dark gaze. Just once, Arthur's godlike face closed in with ultimate deception, his voice bewitching. Carrie fell for it. And then, this overwhelming blizzard lasted all the way until dawn. When the first ray of dawn pierced the clouds, Carrie gritted his teeth and kicked the still-sated, tireless alpha to the edge of the bed. But Arthur smoothly caught that lean, red-marked ankle, the ultimate tenderness rippling in his profound eyes. He leaned down and pressed a devout kiss to Carrie's glistening lips. The crisp, snowy luminescence, like an aurora that would never fade, tightly wrapped around them both. Carrie, I love you. Arthur, I love you too.
And that's where our story ends. The whole idea behind the star named Watermelon Patch is just incredibly romantic. It might sound a bit rustic, but it carries all of Carrie's longing for his late father and his purest hopes for a future partner. And this quirky little star actually served as the ultimate test for true love. When Dick condescendingly cut Carrie off, complaining that the star wasn't romantic enough, he permanently lost the chance to ever learn its name. Arthur, on the other hand, didn't show a hint of disdain. When he gently asked if he could be the one to know its name, I think that sheer respect and anticipation completely unlocked Carrie's heart. Arthur is undeniably the most breathtaking salvation in this entire story. Despite his godlike looks and elite status, he always approached Carrie with this careful, almost self-deprecating vulnerability. My absolute favorite part has to be the scene on the rooftop, where Arthur finally confesses his true feelings. secretly watching Carrie toil away under the scorching sun, and then buying up the entire watermelon harvest just to distract his love from a broken heart. He never once laughed at Carrie for naming a star Watermelon Patch. Instead, he used his immense wealth to officially buy the naming rights. Even with the massive gap in their social standing, Arthur's clumsy, yet profoundly genuine love smoothed over every obstacle. It's the beautiful story of two souls under a starry summer night, healing one another and completely filling the voids in each other's lives. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.